Why should we care about doing what is morally right? Well, consider a case where nothing bad happens. Let's call this the petty trespassing case. Suppose you're in a situation where you're late to some important meeting and you're walking to the meeting by foot and you need to get there as soon as you possibly can. And you notice that you could go through somebody's yard, right? You could cut through their yard and you would make it to the meeting much, much faster. And maybe we could even throw into the story that it's just about to rain, so you don't want to get rained on. Well, there's a trespassing sign that says no trespassing. And so you think to yourself, nobody's going to notice me. I can sneak through their backyard real fast and it'll be totally fine. No harm, no foul, right? So what should you do? Should you respect the property owner's wishes and walk around the house in order to get to your meeting, even though you might be late and you might get rained on? Or should you jump the fence and cut through the yard, make it to your meeting on time, and avoid the rain that's on the horizon? It's not immediately obvious which you should do, especially if we stipulate from the outset that no one, in fact, will ever know, right? Maybe there's no one around and you have a guarantee that no one's ever going to find out. You simply will not get caught. You won't get in trouble. Again, no harm, no foul. Another sort of case that Nagel brings up at the very beginning of chapter 7 is what we can call the library case. Nagel says, suppose you work in a library, checking people's books as they leave, and a friend asks you to let him smuggle out a hard-to-find reference work that he wants to own. You might hesitate to agree for various reasons. You might be afraid that he'll be caught and that both you and he will then get into trouble. You might want the book to stay in the library so that you can consult it yourself. But you may also think that what he proposes is simply wrong, that he shouldn't do it, and you shouldn't help him. If you think that, what does it mean? And what, if anything, makes it true? So these are the sorts of cases that I want you to be thinking about as we continue. What exactly does it mean to say that these things are wrongs? Why should we care about these things in the first place? Now, you might think, well, it's illegal to trespass, or it's against the rules to smuggle the library book out. But we need to keep this distinction between what's legally permissible and what's morally permissible clear. There is a difference between legal and moral wrong actions. Something, for instance, can be legally permissible but morally wrong, and something can be legally wrong but morally permissible. Let's break this down a little bit. So let's try to think of something that would be legally permissible but morally wrong. You might, for instance, think that abortion is morally wrong. Nonetheless, at least in some states, abortion is legally permissible. So this would be an example of where something is legally allowed but morally not allowed. Or, for example, you might think that recreational use of marijuana is morally permissible. There's nothing wrong with it. Nonetheless, at least in some states, it's still legally impermissible. So this would be a case where something is legally wrong, but morally permissible. And there's lots of examples like this where some society might put into place certain laws or rules or regulations that are morally wrong. Nonetheless, they may even be legally required. Consider, for instance, in Nazi Germany, where it was legally wrong to hide a Jewish person. Nonetheless, you might think that it was morally required of you to do so. Or in the United States, you might think that segregation laws were morally wrong. Slavery, for example, was clearly morally wrong. Nonetheless, it was the law of the land at the time. So clearly, then, That morality and legal concerns can and often do come apart. So the mere fact that something might be legally prohibited does not automatically make it morally wrong. Likewise, the mere fact that something may be legally allowed does not mean that it's morally allowed. So then, what exactly is it that makes something morally wrong? Well, maybe it has something to do with the fact that someone is harmed. We could say that X is morally wrong because X harms someone, where we plug anything we want into the variable X. But what exactly does that mean? We could say X harms the person doing that action, X, or we could say that X harms someone else other than the person doing that action, X. But again, our question is whether something could be morally wrong, even if no one is ever harmed by that thing. This is why we began with talking about the petty trespassing case or the library case. In these cases, nobody is actually ever harmed. So, what makes it morally wrong, assuming that it is morally wrong? But maybe these sorts of cases are cheap. Maybe we should focus on a different sort of case, something like murder. Most people, I think, would say that murder is clearly wrong. Unless if you're a moral monster of some sort, you would probably agree that murder is wrong. But why? What is it about murder that makes it morally wrong? Maybe what you could say then is that murder is wrong because it's an immoral kind of killing. But that's not going to help. And the reason why this doesn't help is because when we say that murder is immoral killing, this is just to assume that it's a form of killing that is immoral. And so that begs the question, right? That's sort of presupposing the very thing that we're trying to explain. It does not tell us why murder is wrong. It only tells us that killing is wrong when it's immoral. Surely we still agree that murder is wrong. So maybe we should back up a little bit. Maybe we should think about why killing, at least sometimes, itself is morally wrong. Killing indirectly harms individuals connected to the individual who was killed. That's at least one way to think about this. Still, there's counterexamples to this claim. Right? The mere fact that it indirectly harms individuals connected to the person who is killed alone can't explain why some forms of killing is wrong. Take, for example, a monk who chooses to live an isolated and solitary life. Now, if this monk who has no friends, no family, and lives all alone out in the wilderness, if you're traveling and you come upon this monk and you kill that monk, have you done something morally wrong? Not if we think that what makes killing morally wrong is that it indirectly harms individuals connected to that person who is killed, because there is no individual who is connected to this monk. They're isolated, live in a solitary life, and they're doing so by choice. And so if you kill that monk, you haven't done something morally wrong on this way of thinking about what makes killing wrong. Or think about some prisoner who's a recluse. If this prisoner is on death row and is facing the death penalty, they're going to die anyways. And they're recluse, right? They don't have any friends or any family. If you have this prisoner as a cellmate and you decide one night to kill them, well, it has not harmed anybody connected to them. They don't have any friends or any family or anyone that would be indirectly harmed by their death. Yet we would still think that killing this prisoner or killing the monk would be morally wrong. It would be something that is morally wrong to do, even if it is the case that there's no one who's indirectly harmed by this killing. So then, if it's not indirectly harming other individuals who are connected to the person who is killed that makes killing wrong, at least in some cases, maybe killing harms the person who does the killing. Maybe it directly harms the murderer. But what about those people who simply don't care? There's lots of psychopaths or sociopaths in the world who are simply unmoved by the fact that they may be harmed if they kill someone. What reasons do they have not to kill? It seems like we don't have any motivations we can identify for why they should avoid killing people. Now, of course, the way Nagel puts it in this chapter is that these people would be crazy, but it's not obviously clear that this is true. One of the things that makes psychopaths and sociopaths so dangerous is the fact that sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish them from a normal individual. So it's not immediately obvious that this person's crazy. But I do think that pointing to some direct harm, identifying some individual who's directly harmed is a better way of going than pointing towards indirect harms. So if it's not the person who does the killing who's directly harmed, maybe it's the person who is killed who's directly harmed. Maybe we could say that this is at least initially a more plausible way of thinking about it. Nonetheless, I think the devils are in the details. Sometimes this sort of view is called the sanctity of life view for why killing is wrong. So, what does this view say? It says that killing is morally wrong because all life is sacred. But what do we mean by this? Are all forms of life really sacred? Are all forms of killing really morally wrong? Arguably, there's at least some cases of self defense where it is morally permissible to kill someone. The question is, what sort of situation would allow that? Are all cases of self defense like this? And what about war? You might think that at least some wars are justified. Again, what sort of details would we have to specify for when one war is justified and another war is not? And what about plants and bacteria, or scratching your arm and killing a bunch of skin cells? Are we willing to say that these forms of life are sacred, such that if I kill a plant or I kill some bacteria, that this would be morally wrong? What about spiders and ants or mosquitoes? I, for one, definitely hate mosquitoes. I have no problem killing them. I don't have any problem killing spiders either. Does that make me a moral monster? Is the life of a spider the same as a life as a human? The life of a mosquito the same as a child? And what about animal farming? What about the life of a cow or a pig? I think quite a few of us have no problem with animal farming. We probably have no issue, no quarrels with going to McDonald's or eating a nice steak. But these are forms of life. Are these life sacred? Is there something morally wrong with animal farming or killing animals for food? And even if you think there is something morally wrong with animal farming, what about testing or running experiments on non human animals for the benefit of humans? Is there something morally wrong with doing this? Again, are these animals' lives sacred? It's just not clear, right? Where do we draw the line? Where do we say some life is sacred and some life is not sacred? In fact, it gets even worse. Can we even say that all human life is sacred? What about Hitler's life? Would it be morally wrong to kill Hitler because Hitler's life is sacred? These are very difficult issues. And these points are supposed to be counterexamples to the sanctity of life view that says that what makes killing wrong is the fact that all life is sacred. But if all life is not sacred, should we say that human life is sacred and only human life? You might wonder why a human being's life is more sacred than a non human animal's life. This is a kind of speciesism where we place the value of one species' life or well being above that of other species, where we value a human life over a cow's life or a pig's life or an ant's life. Speciesism is sort of like racism. It's a form of discrimination. But here, instead of discriminating between two individuals based upon the color of your skin, we are instead discriminating based upon species membership. And some people think that speciesism is just as wrong, just as morally problematic as racism. But is this true? Well, consider, for example, a Martian. Suppose that we met a Martian or an alien of some form, and it turns out that this Martian is highly intelligent, has a very sophisticated culture and society. They're able to do things that are quite similar to us. In fact, if you want, we can stipulate that they're just like us in almost all respects, except for one thing. They are a Martian and we are not, right? So are the Martians' lives just as valuable as ours? They're able to do all sorts of amazing things. They have art, they have literature and music, they have government and they have educational systems. If we stipulate from the outset that these Martians are like us in all of these respects, then we might want to say that it would be just as wrong to kill them as it would be to kill us. And if that's right, then it looks like we're treating the Martian as a person. We're treating this alien as having some sort of personhood. But now this raises a very interesting question. Could there be a human being that is not a person? And could there be a person who is not a human being? For instance, you might think that somebody is a human being in the biological sense. They have the right DNA, but they are not a person. If, for instance, they don't have the right amount of rationality, or maybe they are in a situation where they're experiencing an irreversible coma patient. If that's the case, we would still call them a human being. It's not clear that they're going to count as a person. There might also be a person who is not a human being, like the Martian. Martian might be a person just like us, but not a biological human being. Looks like it's just very difficult to specify exactly why at least some forms of killing would be morally wrong when we consider these details. Still, I think that most of us will agree that killing is at least sometimes morally wrong. Okay, now let's return to the psychopath or the sociopath who simply doesn't care. And remember what Nagel says. Nagel tells us that the fact that these people don't care does not make it right. The psychopath or the sociopath don't care about whether killing is morally wrong or not, but they should care. But if we can't even explain why killing is wrong, then what could we possibly say to the psychopath or the sociopath who simply doesn't care about morality in the first place? What about ourselves? What motivates you? What motivates me not to kill? Right? Presumably, neither you or myself are going to start killing at any point. But why? What motivates us not to kill? What motivates us to care about morality in the first place? Essentially, this question is asking for reasons. What reasons do we have to care about morality? If we could do whatever we wanted to do without harming anyone, right? If there was no harm and no foul, nobody ever finds out, then what reasons, if any, could we offer for why we shouldn't do such crazy and harmful things? Now, I want to conclude this video by bringing up what's known as the Ring of Gyges. This was a story that was mentioned in Plato's Republic, and it's supposed to illustrate this point. Why should we care about what's morally right or morally wrong if nobody will ever find out about those things? Here's how the story goes. One day, a person finds a ring, a magical ring. Now, what's so magical about this ring is when you put it on, you become invisible. So Gyges finds this magical ring, puts it on, and becomes invisible. Now, Gyges realizes that nobody can see what he's doing and nobody will ever find out about what he does. And so he decides to do all sorts of different things, crazy sorts of things. He decides to go and sleep with his enemy's wife, and he kills his enemy, and then he kills the king and takes over, and he robs and he murders and he does all sorts of terrible things that we would never do if people were watching. So the point is, if nobody's watching, if you could do these things because you were invisible and we had a sort of guarantee that nobody will ever find out, you'll never get in trouble, you'll never be punished for the things you do, What's going to stop you from doing those things? I want you to think about this. If you were like Gyges and could put on a ring, what would you do? Are there things that you would do that you normally would not do because you're worried about being punished or somebody catching you? But I want you to be honest with yourself because it tells us something about our motivation for doing what's morally right and morally wrong. Because some people think that the main motivation for why we do what's morally right and avoid doing what's morally wrong is because of fear of being punished, fear of being found out. But again, if there's no harm, maybe there's no foul. If nobody will ever find out about what you've done, if you're not going to be punished, maybe you haven't done anything wrong in the first place. These are the sorts of things that I want you to keep in mind as we continue through this module.